Enjoy 1% merchant commission when you accept Lanka Pay cards. Contact these banks today.
Welcome to Times Online. Today we have Mr. Jeevan Gnanam, co-founder Hatch, the accelerator, incubator and co-living space. Welcome, Mr. Gnanam.
Thank you. Great to be here.
What was the thought process behind starting something like Hatch?
I think I was very involved in the startup ecosystem very early on, and initially I was probably the second most prolific angel investor in Sri Lanka, just putting money into startups and the startup ecosystem.
How did you identify the gap in the market to start Hatch?
But what I found was they were making very similar mistakes, and they weren't learning from each other. Hence it dawned on me that we need to create a space where the startups can sit next to each other, learn from each other, grow together, face challenges together, and that way they actually, graduate from a very basic startup to a much more fundable, investable startup much sooner.
How many startups have you incubated so far?
So Hatch started with about 28 startups in its founding in the year it started, and today it's home to about 120.
How many years did you take to incubate these startups?
And throughout, I think the 4-year journey, we've helped grow our through one of our programs, whether it's acceleration program, incubation program, about close to 530 odd startups.
Mr. Gnanam, can you name some prominent startups that have come out of Hatch?
Yeah, to be very honest, in the last 4 years, because we've had various issues, from the April bombings onwards, COVID, etc. The percentage of startups that we've seen go global are probably, I would say 5 to 10%, somewhere there. It's not a lot, but I think it's also cracking and slowly figuring out how do we connect to other startup ecosystems, like ones in Singapore, which are more mature and there's more funding available. And I think we're seeing more of that now. As we grow, we're kind of taking the startups with us. So I think that number is just going to increase.
Mr. Gnanam, can you name some prominent startups that have come out of Hatch?
I think just to name a few, I think there's a buy now, pay later startup that went through one of our programs called MinPay that got a valuation of $3-4 million from K3 Ventures. Then there is I think Rotha, who's doing quite well. There's examples of startups that are coming through all the time.
Hatch embarked on a partnership with Draper House recently. Could you please explain this partnership?
I think this year we launched Trouble Nation, the Startup Nation, as a way to kind of market Sri Lanka outside as a place for possible startups to happen. I think with that, Draper Startup House saw the opportunity in Sri Lanka to kind of create change, impact, and grow the country. So they came on board. They invested in Draper Startup House and Hatch, co-creating a co-living space, the first of its kind in Sri Lanka, in first Orion City, and then we're looking at 2-3 other locations. So it's great to have a partner like that because I think their strength is in co-living. We have strengths in incubation, acceleration, etc. And then taking those two and leveraging off each other, we'll be able to have a bigger reach, because I think Draper Startup House can bring in what's called digital nomads, and digital nomads, being very different from regular tourists, actually can give back to the economy, either through technology transfer or coming and working with the startups here. I think that's going to be a big kind of a new way to look at tourism, and I think that's really what we're trying to do with them.
Mr. Gnanam, you mentioned digital nomads. We have had several discussions in the past few months about digital nomads and facilitating them to come to Sri Lanka. As I understand, we still do not have the proper infrastructure for them to set up in Sri Lanka. What have you done about this?
Certainly. I think we shouldn't say we want more regulation, because sometimes more regulation is also troublesome. What we want is market ability for market access, and for tourists to freely come in and out. And I think, in a way, it's there. I think the processes had to be put in place for the digital nomad visa program, for example, where we were working with the ICTA to kind of fast track. So all of these things have to, even though maybe they do exist, they need to be articulated in a better way, communicated in a better way. And I think tourists now can also bring in money. It's just, and make payments, etc. So I don't think that's also a problem. So I think we are at a level where we can attract tourists, but we always have to be mindful that we're competing against other other destinations, and a lot of other countries have also launched digital nomad programs. What we're trying to do is create a digital nomad program which is slightly differentiated, where we're trying to say, hey, not only come to the country and enjoy the restaurants, etc., but also work with startups locally, right? Create impact, create a future, right, here. So and get that engagement going, which I think will be very different from the way other countries have done a digital nomad program.
Going back to the Draper House partnership with Hatch, who initiated this partnership?
I think we'd initiated discussion because we were in Singapore and we had a chat with their Singapore team. Okay. Then subsequently they came down, they liked what they saw with Hatch and everything that we've created here, and they said, hey, and they just saw an opportunity that they, where they can make an impact and where they wanted to create change, and got together.
Why I asked that question was they basically came over India to Sri Lanka. So what was the attraction in Sri Lanka for them to set up here?
I think definitely some of the startups here in Sri Lanka are exciting. India, I think, to be honest, is probably a bit more mature than Sri Lanka. But you're also talking about there are many players, and it's a very big market. Mm-hmm. While here, I suppose you could be a stronger player in a smaller market. Mm-hmm. So I think it's that thinking that got them here and said, okay, maybe we can be a bigger fish in a smaller pond where we can create more change. And what's exciting about Sri Lanka, I think, for people from outside looking at Sri Lanka, is that they can try products here, they can try ideas here, and then take them out to the market in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in India, etc., to the region after trialing out here, right? And I think big companies have done that, but I think it's time for startups also to do that.
I understand that there's a TV program as well.
Yes. Yes,
Can you explain about that?
Okay, so the program is called Meet the Drapers. It's very much like a Shark Tank type program where startups are kind of shortlisted and a few get to pitch live on TV, and the ones that get selected get to take part in $1 million prize, and the lucky one that gets selected gets $1 million. They like to say that they obviously overpromise and underdeliver, which means actually more than $1 million will be given as investment to the startups.
Have you started filming it?
Yes, the show was produced and shot here at Hatch. Good, we had a good reception of that, and the startups have been selected.
How many startups participated in the TV program?
Out of the total program, so there was about 40 applicants. Mm-hmm. Out of those 40 applicants, 10 were shortlisted, mm-hmm. and from the 10, I think 6 were selected to go online.
How does the recent visit of Mr. Tim Draper help the local startup ecosystem?
Well, I think the first thing is it's going to give them hope, right? And just having Tim visit some of the startups and talk to them, give them a big morale boost, right? Something that they haven't had in the recent past. And the ability to connect to someone in the Silicon Valley, especially of that stature, I think will really, really help. The second is, this is the first time he's visited Sri Lanka. So he's definitely interested in investing in the startups, other than the ones being selected on the show. I think there is a pipeline of startups now that will get started will get started to build that will eventually be in his radar to invest, et cetera, and he knows of this market, and this market needs all the investment that it can take. So I think this will definitely help as well. Third, he's actually invested in Hatch, and with Draper Startup House. So I think that also helps the ecosystem build, and with their expertise and their connectivity to the global markets, that really helps, and that we can help our startups go as well.
Mr. Gnanam, I remember you mentioning that the past 2 years was super busy for Hatch. With the pandemic and everything else connected, that seems so unreal. How did this happen?
So the good thing is, while our the Araglay was going on, Hatch was busy because, and even though there were kind of barriers here, the startups really wanted to come into Hatch, not only because we had 24/7 electricity, but also I think what really drew them here was the community, and they want to be part of that community where others are working till 3, 4 in the morning, building their dream, building their startup, building what they want to take into the world, right? So that is very addictive. That kind of ecosystem community is very addictive, and I think people want to come in. So what keeps us motivated is just that, and continuing to grow that is a very hectic thing. So we've been busy.
How do you see the startup landscape in this country?
I think the startup landscape is continuously improving. I think we've seen a few bright lights, right? And I think it's the ecosystem's responsibility, like players like Hatch, ICT, etc., to really get around these few bright lights and really push them to shine, right? And I think the more examples of success stories that we have, and I mentioned a few, the more that we have, the more people will look at this as a way of life, right? And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage entrepreneurship. We're trying to encourage people to take risks, to build their own businesses. And we really believe at Hatch that we're building the next set of businesses that come out in Sri Lanka, right? And change the kind of the landscape.
How do you rate the startup landscape in Sri Lanka against the global startup landscape?
Today, with the pandemic, etc., any startup can choose to be global from day one. Of course, that's easier said than done, but I think what we want to encourage is startups with local talent, but always having a global mindset. So whenever a startup comes in, we always tell them, hey, why aren't you thinking about this globally, right? How can you position your product globally? Yes, Sri Lanka is an initial test bed for you, but that's just the very initial start of what you can do. So any startup that comes out of Hatch today, we always want to have a global reach, a global mindset.
What are your plans for Hatch in the medium term?
Oh, good question. So we are going to continue to grow what we have. So we're full at the moment. We're looking at 1 or 2 other locations. We want to be in South Asia. So currently we're growing in Pakistan with a new space, and we'd like to go into Bangladesh. That not only helps our startups, but helps with their startups as well, and kind of grows this kind of South Asia kind of area for our startups. So we want to grow in South Asia with the co-working space, the accelerator programs, incubator programs. We also want to start looking at co-living, especially in Sri Lanka, where we see 1 or 2 locations on the beach where digital nomads want to come down and grow. And thirdly, we also have a fund which we're trying to. It's more like a bridge fund where we help startups go to more advanced markets like Singapore. So we have a lot of plans, and we're working on them slowly but surely.
Mr. Gnanam, with the present economic crisis, there is a lot of brain drain that is happening in Sri Lanka. How has that affected the startups in Sri Lanka?
Yeah. I don't think it affects startups so much, the brain drain. The reason being is their startups are anyway doing what they want to do, right? So they can do this in any part of the world, as I said, because these startups are global day one. So I think startups that are looking to build here are probably more worried about affordability and stuff like that than is my salary being cut because they're basically paying themselves, right? So I think the brain drain does indirectly affect startups, but so far I have not seen it directly affecting startups. And obviously, in many ways, the brain drain, I think people are always wondering, hey, should we move, should we not move, etc. So there's always a bit of that, but all in all, I don't think it really affects startups that.
Mr. Gnanam, thank you very much for that insightful explanation on the startup landscape in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.